Yeah, so I kind of based on our talk last night, and maybe this is preempting a little bit the idea that we have for later in the day, but I decided to make this much more rather than conference, just because I'm very interested in what you think. So I'll describe just briefly the work that I did, but the bit that I want to talk about mostly is the political bit of how to get pull requests through in LilyPond, and this is kind of what I pitched to Werner when I talked about this slot, is that I'd like to talk about the social experiment of pure containers, because it's been maybe 8 years since I brought up the idea and proposed a patch. So since then I've had a lot of different roles programming in different situations, and I have reflections about certain things that I did poorly and certain things that I wish that I had done better at the time, and also wondering as a community, how can we kind of nurture people that are more junior like myself at the time? Not that I'm claiming that I've grown a little bit over 8 years, but we're always learning. And then just trying to think about also what could have prevented some of the bottlenecks in that process. So briefly, pure containers is this idea that when you're doing typesetting, one of the nasty problems that you run into is circular dependencies. So a classic thing can be beams that is it possible to bring up the
Yes.
Yeah.
By the way, I hope you have seen this address where you can get the uploaded talks.
If you're laying out this line of music, and let's say that your piece only comprises things that look like this, so no beams, only quarter notes, accidentals. It's rare that you'll have something like this, but nothing about this is unknown at a first pass of engraving. So essentially, there's very few aesthetic decisions that can't be figured out in just a linear way by reading from left to right. And because of that, you can make estimates about how big these objects will be and how far apart they should be spaced during the first pass. And what that means is that in your layout algorithms, you have very rich information about how this will look when it's placed on the stack. So what LilyPond will see is something like this. These are called skylines. So basically the idea is that there's a skyline on top and a skyline on the bottom. And then the vertical spacing engine in LilyPond smushes staves on the page or not based on what the skylines are. So the idea with pure and impure containers, impure is not a word, it was just invented because the word itself is impure. So it's like self-referential in that way. So the idea is that the more stuff that's pure, meaning the more stuff that can be known beforehand, the more confidence you could have about what the skyline of your music is going to look like, the better layout decisions you can make. And the reason it's important to make those better layout decisions is twofold. One is that it eliminates circular dependencies, meaning that you don't need to do as many passes over the score to figure stuff out. Circular dependencies and multiple passes over the score is expensive in LilyPond. And the other is it constrains the optimization space of page-breaking layout. So the way that Hanwhan and I had a discussion maybe like 12 years ago now. I had asked naively, why doesn't LilyPond do any constraint optimization problems, like tonic optimization problems, in order to fit stuff together? And your response, I don't know if you remember, I do, was that LilyPond would explode if you did. I think you said you had even tried doing that, and it's just impossible, which is true. So the iterative method of testing if something works, no, testing another thing, and kind of having some type of shrinker like in functional programming, if you use quick check or things like that in Haskell that for property-based testing that shrink towards a result. It's the same idea here, that you shrink towards the best or most optimal result for fitting things together. So that process of iterating through things takes a bit of time, and by having confidence about what the skyline will represent, it decreases the time to layout and leads to a better result. On the other hand, stuff that's impure are things like this. So, sorry, this is not the best layout, but that's why I use LilyPond, right? So, so here, this encapsulates all of those nasty things that I talked about. So, one is the notion of circular dependency. So, depending on how far apart these two staves are, this beam might be kneed, or it might be straight. We don't know. But if it's kneed versus straight, that actually changes the size of the beam, which changes the amount of space you need between the staves, which changes the pagination, which changes the line breaking, which comes back and redoes this. That's the circular dependency that I'm talking about. And that's the thing that's quite hard to approximate with any notion of a pure container, because we don't have enough confidence about what it will look like. However, we don't throw our hands up and say we're screwed, otherwise it would never compile. So what we do is we make best guesses about what this will reasonably look like, and then during a second pass, make small adjustments to those best guesses to get a LilyPond score. So those are the impure bits, and the impure bits, one way to think about it is a pure container will never trigger this type of decision, whereas an impure container needs an approximation, a proxy, so that it doesn't trigger that type of decision. Because if you trigger staff breaking before LilyPond's ready and the layout algorithms are ready, then you'll get a suboptimal result. So that was the algorithm as implemented. I did it, actually, it's always hard to remember why somebody does something. I mean, the ostensible reason was that I thought I needed it for my scores, and maybe other people did too, but I just kind of did it because it was fun. I don't know how many of you in the room that corresponds to, but I'd love to see from a show of hands, like how many people work on features on LilyPond, not necessarily because they're useful, but just because they get personal enjoyment out of the process of working. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think that's something that maybe we don't talk about or acknowledge enough, because we're always talking about kind of that abstract people or concrete people in this room that we're serving when we're writing these things and the problems we're trying to solve. But it's okay to be indulgent and talk about the personal pleasure you get from developing the things. I mean, if that's why we're doing it, then we should acknowledge that that's a big part of it. Maybe that segues me a little bit to the real thing I want to focus on. Is kind of part of that pleasure is not just the code that you're working on, but it's the whole entire process around the code. It's the community, it's the people that you meet along the way. There was an amazing get-together I remember 8 years ago at David's house, where you bought beer and pizza for everybody, and we slept on couches and saw your horses and coded a bunch of this stuff, and that was super fun. And that, of course, influences the decision, these very minor decisions of like, will I take my kid to an outdoor playground today where I have to supervise them, or will I take them to an indoor playground where somebody else will supervise them so I can write some LilyPond code? You know, it's those little day-to-day decisions that turn into features and that turn into things that are actually in the code base, because this is how people spend their time. So, so now I'll talk about kind of the things that I feel I failed at when I was putting this patch through. Some people might disagree, but this is just my learnings from kind of being out of the wild and seeing more stuff. So the first issue was that this patch was proposed right as 2.18 was coming up as a release. So there wasn't enough time to kind of properly vet it in development versions, and what it meant is that in 2.18 it more or less works, but it led to some suboptimal situations of people maybe being a little bit too stressed out or more stressed out before a release than they should be, because there's a major breaking change in there. So that's one. The other is that the patch, as it was worked on in this branch that, for those of you who have developed along with LilyPond, I'm sure you've been in the situation that you make an innocent branch do one little thing, and then it develops to something bigger, and you pull in for a master, but there's so much drift between the two that it's unreasonable to expect anybody to read the branch that you've come up and to do a pull request. There's this great James Joyce quote about, Finnegan's Wake, where somebody asked him, like, why is it so hard? And his response is, it took me my whole life to write it, it should take you your whole life to read it. And pull requests shouldn't be that. They should be the opposite of that. So, unfortunately, there's one thing that, yeah.
4 minutes.
4 minutes. So, and it gets this idea of being clever in coding. I mean, being clever is, your mom might be proud of you for being clever in coding, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people that you're interacting with can get what you're doing. So there's that. That was an issue. And the other issue is that once you turn this on, everybody's spacing changed. It was like, a communist country from the 60s and 70s that you just went with the program and you kind of didn't necessarily have it. You see, I'm American, so I've been brainwashed by the propaganda. Maybe it was excellent to those countries. That's what they told us in school anyway. So you didn't have a choice. You couldn't opt out of this new spacing engine that was created. And I think more or less people are happy with it right now. But it's much nicer to introduce these things incrementally. So those are two things that I failed at, that maybe if I had a little bit more mentorship or knowledge at the time, I could have done a better job at. I'm curious to hear if LilyPond could have or ever can be a supportive environment that can avoid those. And then in general, how can we nurture larger, more ambitious contributions more? And I say this coming from the purely selfish standpoint that I'm a binge coder. So I go on these kind of like quests and make stuff, and then it's there, and I'm a very bad incremental coder of these like one-offs, unless like we're drinking wine in a bar, like last night. But I can't drink wine all the time, because like, what fun would that be? Actually, no, maybe.
Actually, that'd
that'd be great. But so how can we make LilyPond maybe a more appealing place for people that enjoy going on these types of quests, or does it even need to be? I mean, another possibility is that it shouldn't. That's not what LilyPond needs, and that people that have that type of energy should focus in another way. So sorry, we're probably already over, but I just thought I'd throw those ideas out there. I appreciate your listening to them and maybe thinking about them and giving some responses. Yeah.
Mike, is there any chance that you will again invest time into LilyPond coding?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my the very brief story of why I'm not now is that my ensemble was a lot of like typesetting, but not necessarily coding. But now, unfortunately, I'm the CEO of a company that just realistically has lots of clients and revenue and investment and stuff like that. So I hate the idea that like my time is somehow more eaten up than everybody's time. Nobody has time, right? That's just how it is. But so it's an excuse, and I realize it's an excuse. But that's kind of the place that my life is taking me now. I love it personally, the challenges that are associated with that. But it makes it tough. However, I say my answer is yes in the long term, meaning that one of these days, maybe we'll exit to like Google or something, and then maybe I'll have time.
Where are you going to sell the company?
Yeah, well,
Simple question.
does anybody have $5? So there's that. But then in the short term, and this is getting a little bit to these things about the IDE. So meeting with Kieran last night was a pleasure. Banging something out and just getting it out there. And I think maybe if there were communication channels that kind of made these things. I hate saying more appealing, because it's really what I mean is more appealing to me. It's selfish, right? But like if something that was not necessarily email back and forth, but like get-togethers, like meetup.com, or like some type of chat forum, or like people could help each other out, maybe that would facilitate those things. So I would love to.
Because this is the thing, because you are basically only reachable via WhatsApp.
Yeah, I mean, so I am reachable via email. It's my work email. It just goes through an assistant. So I should teach that person.
So what's the magic word that you actually get really together? Maybe it should be mentioned LilyPond somewhere in the title, and then your assistant says, "Oh no, let me read it."
Yeah. I am, and it's a lame thing to say, but that's kind of the processes that we've set up to kind of just shield me from some of the crap that comes into my inbox. This would not be it, of course. I would love to deal with these things in some way. But WhatsApp is a way for you to cut right through to me, and then I don't have to deal with any of that corporate bullshit. I don't read my personal email anymore for this reason. So I don't know. I really don't know. But I really appreciate, Werner, specifically you taking the time to contact me on WhatsApp. It's been like so refreshing to be at this conference, but that's just kind of where I'm at. Yeah.
I wanted to say something with regard you said how it would be possible to do that simpler. I mean, we had previous to the Unpure-pure containers, we had something called simple closures or stuff like that, and that was opaque in use and opaque in documentation. I mean, the problem was we have completely replaced it. It was a clean-up phase afterwards, where we've seen where is it still used and thrown it out and replaced with Unpure-pure containers, because they're conceptually one can a bit more wrap one's head around what they're actually doing than it was possible with the simple closures. There were a few examples, but I couldn't. I just couldn't make head and tail out of it, and if I can't make head and tail out of something, I'm arrogant enough to say that it's probably going to be a problem for others as well. And so that was an improvement. But with regard to how this could be changed, I think the things like circular dependencies, which are sometimes only potential and only occur in certain situations, it would be better to figure them out dynamically. Basically what we do now is we have callbacks that are either pure or unpure, and if they are pure, they also get the columns of the current column, left and right column. And what I think I would like to do eventually is to just drop that difference, just have a single callback after all. And this callback does not get the left and right column, but it can ask LilyPond for them. And if it asks LilyPond for the left column, LilyPond notices, okay, this decision depends on the left column, and makes a notice that the value is only valid if the left column corresponds to what you told the procedure. And you may have callbacks that ask politely, where LilyPond can answer, not yet, please try without, and the callback and then decide, okay, I have to produce something preliminary in order to resolve circular dependencies. And I think it will be much easier to program such callbacks, even if you end up that LilyPond says, okay, I refuse because there is a circular dependency. But it would mean that the things you now have to mark as unpure and have to say it may depend on the page break decision, but that may end actually not depending on the page break decision, just because the other elements which would cause it to depend on the page break decision are not present. It would make this much easier for the user, because he does not have to distinguish this case in advance and have to design with those structures, but can just work with callbacks and then decide, okay, do I need this? Do I need to contact the other properties? And LilyPond itself will notice whenever such a dependency occurs. That's something I want to get at in the long run, because it would just make things easier for those trying to cast layout decisions into code and probably even design new elements.
Absolutely.
My from a user's point of view, going back to the simple closures, I think it wasn't documented well back in those days, and the containers aren't yet. The example in the notation reference simply doesn't show anything. I never really understood what and every time I think I should use now for some classic code, I try to read sunshine of understanding that the pop-up magically vanishes after.
Yeah, it would be quite important to have some documentation when the pure and unpure parts of an unpure container will be called and what the values that are returned, how permanent they are supposed to be, and how they and when they will be cached, and how they will affect typesetting. That's actually something. The interaction of the pure unpure containers with the phases of line and page breaking is just not clear.
The working example. A working example.
I think I want to sort of cut short this discussion a little bit because I haven't seen something else. And so Mike said, actually, so there's a technical thing, but the more important bit is the political and so the motivation of the people. And so I want to go into that as well. And you could also, Werner could also ask me, well, Han, when you've been away so long and we miss you, and when are you going to start getting back into LilyPond again? And my answer is actually basically the same. So I know, like, I'm busy and I have work, and and my wife needs attention. But I know for myself, I actually work on Garrett, which is Git related, and now I'm in this huge 20,000 lines of code project to integrate a new storage format into Git. And like, my boss isn't telling me to do that, but I sort of got into it, and it sort of sucked me in, and now I want to finish it. And so the trick is to trick me and Mike into getting sucked into projects again. And one of the things that I noted, writing the code and doing clever things with LilyPond is very satisfying. But then if I have to upload, get a credential for SourceForge and install all these weird tools, and then my TA and all these dependencies are at the wrong versions, it's actually, for me, and I know the system very well, it's also quite hard to get to a point where I can actually write code. And once I've written it, we have this completely weird process of just upload it to one side and then maybe you have to push it to staging or something, right? So the sort of
No, that's just for developers. I mean,
I'm a developer, right?
That's for those who are active in the project. I mean, there is also. It's clear in the documentation that if you want to contribute something, you are free to send just the formatted patch to the developer list, and then it will be shepherded through.
That's a simpler solution. You have, as far as I can see, you have resurrected the mirror to GitHub, right?
No, I just did get a push.
No, I think
There's no mirror like it. I ran Git from the command line once.
And this is not. I thought this gets mirrored automatically.
If someone writes code to make it, if someone sets a job up somewhere that does this, then it could be automated.
So the question: who is in this group doing this mirroring besides you?
I can put you in the group, and then it's your. Then
I don't care. I don't care.
Do you know you're still an owner of that?
I'm almost daily doing a Git pull of LilyPond, and it's a trivial thing to just make Git push on GitLab.
Okay, I'll have you
GitHub.
I'll give you push access.
You have push access?
Yes, I think Yannick and I set up this mirror one day.
Just do it, please. Don't forget it.
But how is this?
No, the thing is, but this is a side issue. The thing is, if this mirror is up to date, please, if you want to contribute something, simply make a push request on GitHub. And we will take care of shepherding it into LilyPond's original source code repository. Because it should be convenient for you, If you want to contribute something, it's not necessary to because you know how to do it in the right way. And we also can look at GitHub. It's not a big issue.
Yeah. Well, I would hope that there would be like a single process for everyone that is both convenient for a person like me, but also convenient for a person that is
Of course.
beginner.
But there's a usual question, for example, changing the system. First, it's a lot of discussion. Secondly, someone has to do this change. You know, changing from SourceForge to Gerrit is not a trivial thing, in my opinion. Maybe it's easy for you because you're a Mr. Gerrit, so to say. But yeah, but on the other hand, it's a new tool to learn. We have to convert it. We have to set up new routines, new scripts, and so on and so on. And the question is, when will this ever happen? You know, right now there's no one who is dedicated, who see it as a mission to do that.
Kieran had his hand up, I just want to, because you're kind of far away.
This all seems to me to circle around zones of genius and where people are in terms of both their levels and their interests and where that comes together. I know we don't have a huge pool of people to shepherd and help and commit at a top level, but I think we're right at the point. This is the important point right here. This is how we're going to grow the LilyPond contributing community, by allowing people who have, I'll use myself as an example, high passion, reasonably high intelligence level, but low, either low time availability or low, we're still at a low level of understanding of how to contribute. To find the way in for that person, there's somebody, there's some mechanism, there's some system that allows me, and then someone like Van Len, who is at the other end with a huge intellect and a huge ability to contribute, but perhaps not, his obstacle is the process, getting in. Is there some way to smooth that process and to have, in a dream world, in a unicorn coming down from the sky world, each of us has an assistant, right? who does all the things we can't do or don't want to do or makes us turn off our binging, you know? Binging comes to a halt, and the assistant takes over and moves it to the goal line, right?
But I must say, I guess on the list of the LilyPond developers list, including me, I'm a good assistant. You know, I'm not the genius contributor, but I think I'm a good assistant.
And this is exactly.
I think that many of us are good assistants.
And I think we need to make it. We need to make it as smooth as possible, as frictionless as possible, for someone to come in and say, "I have this genius idea. This is as far as I got it. Please take it to the goal line." And you're there. I know you're there. But there does seem to be a friction as to how to get across that line.
I just checked. I checked. This sounds like it should be. It should go to a blame game. It's not supposed to be. I just checked in the repository, and Kieran has 3 commits in there, and they are from 10 years ago and before.
Absolutely.
And now we know that Kieran is very active on the mailing list. He's a power user. He's interested. He has compositions he's working with. He's solving problems with LilyPond that are of some complexity, and there is not really a good place for him, for his work, to go for work that's specific to specific kinds of styles of composition. And if we have a user like that and he does not find the way to contribute properly, stuff like that, we're losing out a lot of potential, because it's not just him. I mean, there are probably several people with an involvement as large as his, and there are maybe dozens of them who just are not visible to our mailing lists. And they solve problems, and they solve problems in some manner for themselves, but we have no real way that they can see obviously for them to contribute by what they have figured out for themselves to work.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to answer Werner's call because you asked for men with a mission to make contributing easier, and I would like to do it. The question is whether we will agree on how we want to make it easier, because GitHub is an example.
But I think that the modern way of contributing is having a Git repository where you can provide pull requests. The way, I'm not a big fan of GitHub, but the way how pull requests, if you like pull requests, are presented there, I think it's very good. So if people prefer pull requests, we should accept them, and then someone should take the code and comment it as a usual way, and if it's done, we finally take care of that and commit it. So we don't actually press the merge button on GitHub, which I very much dislike, because you get a wonderful tree-like structure which is so...
Not anymore, you can squash, you have 3 options now.
Okay,
That's not
okay.
an issue.
The better. But then we can get it in the smooth way to the usual thing, getting a number and so on and so on. But this is one possibility. It's not, in my opinion, it's not necessary to, right now, to change the system we have. This has...
Well, I mean, if our system becomes a bottleneck because the way of using pull requests is much more popular, then we have to think about...
Yes,
changing
but
stuff.
again, the question is, let's first do a new release and then discuss these issues. So right now...
I think Kieran has something to say.
I do. I agree with the new release thing, but this is exactly the reason right here. What's going on right here, I can say from personal experience, is the reason that I only have 3 commits from 10 years ago. I make the, as you say, I'll take 100% of the blame because my wife, but
My
wife will give me the blame. I have a brainstorm. This is the way my process is. I have a brainstorm. I solve it for myself. I want other people to have it, but then I find out I mean either GitHub or GitLab or maybe this other thing, and suddenly the explosion of obstacles to me getting this out into the world, it looks like 10 hours of my life just to get this little scheme thing that I wrote into the code. I should put that 10 hours into composing a new piece. So that's what I do.
No, but let me ask a question. Is it really just that? Because from coding by myself, I know writing the code is approximately 20%. Writing documentation and everything else is more than 80%.
I agree 100%. And
so this is a question, is writing the documentation a problem, or is it really just the committing process?
It's a common, it's everything after the 20%. And I am not the type of person, this is back to my zone of genius comment. Someone in the world, maybe not in this room, but someone in the world, their zone of genius is documentation and pushing GitHub. I don't know who that person is, but we need that person.
Yeah.
So that someone like me can send in an email to that person my 12-line scheme thing, a 1 run-on sentence documentation, and 2 hours later, that person has taken it to the goal line. That's what we need.
This is an assistant.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
what
what I was coming back to is something I said yesterday. We need some sort of loosely associated code base, not just like the LSR, but turnkey ready, where you can drop approaches to a particular problem and just leave them there with a basic documentation, and it does not have to get the vetting that the core LilyPond stuff does, and it does not need any quality control. It just needs to be out there so that people can leaf through and make the decisions, shall I try this out, shall I use it, or shall I not, and work eventually gets around what of the many packages that are available is actually useful and is not. And in that way, we don't have really to vet everything that goes in or find a place for it, because if you do some modern composition style, who in the LilyPond team decides, okay, modern kinds of, this may be just what one individual uses, this may be what is used by more, this must be combined with other stuff. Those are things, if the core LilyPond does not need to concern itself with the usability of particular contributions, then the contribution process becomes less of a hassle and less of an idea. Can others use this, and what do I have to do to integrate it? If we have some sort of style repository where people can just dump stuff, I think that would help a lot. Then if they just have to massage it themselves into a form where they can call it in a way that's convenient for them as well, it's, then...
Can I interrupt? So it's now 12:20. There is Wilwood's talk scheduled for an hour ago, which hasn't happened yet. And there's a talk scheduled at 1:30, so an hour from now, about the future of LilyPond, which is kind of what we're discussing right now. So what should we do? So I propose that we leave this subject, maybe we can discuss it over lunch.
It's actually already like...
You had a discussion you wanted to get in before the scheduled time.
Yes. And
where does it fit?
Actually, it would fit right now. Because it's the question whether OpenLilyLib can be or become that place.